Imagine a world more connected than you'd ever expect from the ancient past. Kings writing letters to each other, merchant ships crossing the Mediterranean loaded with tin, copper, and gold, great cities glittering with palaces, temples, and libraries of clay tablets. Now imagine that entire world gone, not slowly, not over centuries, but in the span of a single human lifetime. This is not fiction. This is not exaggeration. This is one of the most mysterious catastrophes in human history, the Bronze Age collapse. Around 1200 BCE, the great civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Near East did not just decline, they shattered. Mighty empires that had stood for hundreds of years crumbled into ash and silence. Cities were burnt to the ground and never rebuilt. Trade routes that connected three continents simply vanished, and writing itself, the very thing that let these people speak to the future, disappeared from entire regions for generations. Historians have called it the first true Dark Age. Some call it the first apocalypse in recorded history. So what happened? Who or what brought the Bronze Age world to its knees? Stick with me, because the answer is stranger and far more human than you might think. Let's set the stage. By 1200 BCE, the Eastern Mediterranean was home to a network of powerful, interconnected civilizations. Egypt, ruled by pharaohs, was still a dominant force. The Hittite Empire controlled much of modern-day Turkey and Syria. Mycenaean Greece was thriving, with palace centers like Mycenae and Pylos commanding trade and tribute. Babylon and Assyria held power in Mesopotamia, and the coastal city-states of Canaan and Cyprus linked them all together through trade. This was, in many ways, a globalized world, thousands of years before globalization was even a word. Tin from as far away as Britain or Afghanistan traveled across the sea to be mixed with copper and forged into bronze, the metal that gave the entire age its name. Diplomatic letters flew between kings who called each other brother, royal marriages sealed alliances, trade ships, like the one discovered wrecked off Uluburun in Turkey, carried goods from a dozen different cultures in a single cargo hold. And then, within the span of about 50 years, it all came crashing down. One by one, the great centers fell. The Hittite capital of Hattusa was abandoned and burned. Mycenaean palaces across Greece were destroyed and never rebuilt on the same scale. The city of Ugarit, a bustling trade hub on the Syrian coast, was so violently destroyed that archaeologists found arrowheads embedded in its walls and clay tablets still baking in the kilns, abandoned mid-task as if the scribes fled and never returned. Even mighty Egypt, though it survived, was left severely weakened, its golden age effectively over. So what caused this? For decades, historians pointed to a single dramatic villain, the so-called Sea Peoples. These were mysterious groups of seafaring raiders, mentioned in Egyptian inscriptions as attacking from the sea with fleets and warriors. Pharaoh Ramesses III boasted of defeating them in a great battle, and for a long time they were blamed as the sole cause of the collapse, a wave of invaders sweeping away an entire civilization. But here's where the story gets more interesting. Modern archaeology suggests the truth wasn't one dramatic invasion, it was a perfect storm. Climate scientists have found strong evidence of a prolonged drought across the eastern Mediterranean around this exact period, lasting decades. Crops failed, harvests shrank, and in a world where kingdoms survived on tightly managed grain surpluses, that kind of famine could break a society from the inside. At the same time, earthquakes appear to have struck several major cities in these decades, a phenomenon some archaeologists have nicknamed an earthquake storm, a chain of seismic events across the region within a short span of time. Add to this the fragility of the trade network itself. Remember, this was a system where every kingdom depended on every other kingdom. Tin from the east, Copper from Cyprus, grain from Egypt, cut just one link and the whole chain could snap. When drought triggered famine and famine triggered unrest, desperate populations may have started moving in search of food and safety, possibly explaining those very sea peoples who might not have been a single invading nation at all, but scattered groups of refugees and raiders set loose by the chaos. Internal rebellions likely followed as starving populations turned against overburdened kings. Diplomatic letters from this era, preserved on clay tablets, show rulers desperately begging their neighbors for emergency grain shipments. One letter from Ugarit pleads for help just before the city's destruction. The system that had made this world so prosperous, total interdependence, became the very thing that doomed it. One kingdom's collapse dragged down its trading partners, who dragged down theirs. Within a single generation, the great palace economies were gone. Literacy collapsed in Greece, the Linear B writing system vanished entirely, and Greece entered several centuries where we have almost no written records at all, a true dark age. Trade routes disappeared, populations shrank. Whole cities were abandoned and left as ruins for archaeologists to uncover thousands of years later. So, what can this ancient catastrophe teach us today? The Bronze Age collapse is often called history's greatest lesson in fragility. A world of dazzling wealth and interconnected trade and diplomatic sophistications, undone not by any single enemy, but by a combination of climate stress, cascading system failures, and the simple, brutal fact that highly connected systems can fail together all at once. It's a haunting reminder that civilizations we assume are permanent can be more fragile than they appear. The people living through 1200 BCE had no idea they were witnessing the end of an age. They were just trying to survive one difficult harvest at a time. And yet, out of these ashes, something new eventually rose. In the centuries that followed, new powers emerged, smaller kingdoms, new technologies like ironworking, and eventually the world that would give rise to classical Greece and the empires we study in school today. The Bronze Age collapse wasn't the end of history. It was a reset, one of the most dramatic in human memory. If you enjoyed diving into this ancient mystery with me, make sure to subscribe for more stories from the deep past, because history is full of collapses, mysteries, and civilizations waiting to be rediscovered. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.